Hello, property investors. Welcome. So today we're going to talk a little bit about landscaping, and I'm very interested to sort of get some feedback from everyone around this topic. The idea of landscaping, I think, is an interesting one, and there's also a little bit of a personal preference involved in it. So if you've got any thoughts, ideas, any additional tips, please feel free to drop it into the comment space so we share it with everyone else in the community. So when it comes to property, I think a lot of us are used to this idea of talking inside the unit itself and what's sort of involved in that, the paint, the decorations, the sort of the I don't know, the internal designs, layouts, your kitchen fixtures, your bathroom fixtures, etc. So I think that we kind of used to, but then there's a sort of a bit of a trend that's going on where people forget that the landscaping or the outside appearance of the property makes a huge difference to the value of your property. And I think that's important for everyone to keep that in mind and say, hey, listen, because that first impression is so important, I need to make sure I look after the landscaping, I look after the outside of my building. And that works when you're looking at flipping a property, when you're looking at selling an existing property out of your portfolio, or when you're looking at trying to get new tenants for your property, because that first impression is so important. When any potential client, be it a tenant or a buyer, rocks up at your property, they want to sort of be blown away. They want to have that wow effect straight away. So I think it's important for us to bear that in mind and really take advantage of that emotional trigger that happens from that first impression. So we often hear the term curb appeal, and that really means when someone pulls up in front of your property, what does it look like? What does it feel like? And sort of the emotions that it triggers in them. So that curb appeal is very important. And I think you should take that as that journey from when they're arriving at your property, into the property, through the property, and often into your backyards if it's a sort of freestanding property, or if it's in a complex with backyards. That sort of experience needs to be sort of, they need to travel that journey as they enter and move through your property. So I really think it's important for people to bear that in mind. And for us as property investors, that needs to be really high on our to-do list around our properties. Another thing that tends to happen as investors is once you've got it established, you tend to almost forget about it and say, listen, it's done. There it is. I've got a client in the property. I can move on with my life. And that sort of portfolio, that property is just involved in my portfolio, and I tend to forget about it. So I think it's also good to come back to properties and readdress them and look at, hey, how can I improve this? And I think that falls very deeply in line with our facilities management program. And even on a maintenance level, everything that we do, and we should be reinvesting into the property every year to grow the equity in that property. So I'm not talking about over-capitalizing the property, but it is important. You can't just expect to receive equity growth by letting your property fall to fallow and waste away. And I see that often. So as property investors, it's something that we are paying attention to when we're looking for a deal, is we're looking for a property that is neglected. And landscape is the one that's in your face. It's obvious from a perspective of being neglected, a perspective of the owners having moved on. There's no sort of care for the property. So I think we take advantage of it from that perspective. So on the same note, we should make sure we're looking after our own properties. So looking at it and working through from this idea of a journey, and so I think it's important to look at the appearance of your property from a landscaping perspective, and then B, the affordability or the expense that you're going to have there. And I think there's two levels. Is obviously depending on where the property is, how much are you going to spend on your landscaping? So obviously, if it's in a lot more of an affluent area, you're able to spend a little bit more because you're not over capitalizing on the landscaping. But then when you're in sort of a lower area, a not so affluent area, you still want to be spending money on your landscaping. You want your property to stand out. You want it to be appealing to potential buyers or potential tenants. So you do need to spend a bit in this space. But then the other side of the upfront cost is, what is the maintenance level on having the landscaping done? Bearing in mind that either you have to have someone go in and look after your property, or you're going to hand that responsibility over to your tenant, and that maintenance needs to be as easy as possible. Otherwise, it's going to be neglected by the tenant, and your property is going to fall apart. And when you're then trying to replace tenants, it's a case of starting again, trying to revive all the plants that have been sort of killed during that period. So we want plants, we want landscaping that's going to be very easy to maintain and very cheap to maintain. Often we look at things like grass, which is awesome. I think I really do enjoy having lawns in the property, depending on the size of the property. But it's also good to bear in mind that if you're only going to have a sort of small pathway of grass, you need to then consider, hey, if I need to then get my tenant to buy a lawnmower just to cut this, 4 square meters of grass, is there a good return on investment in that space? If I'm going to have to pay a sort of garden service company to just come by once a week and trim that grass, or once every 2 weeks and trim that grass, is that an affordable solution? So I enjoy lawns, but there has to be a lot more of a green lawn for it to really justify A, having your own equipment, or B, getting the garden services to come around. And speaking of garden services, I think that is a very important element to build into your numbers when you're looking at buying properties, you're looking at renting the properties, because again, we always think of this portfolio as being something that needs to work passively, needs to work without us. So a garden service, or running the numbers and including your garden service in those numbers, is very important, because that becomes less hands-on. And likewise, when you're thinking of a garden service, you don't think in the same way of having a full-time gardener who's pruning trees, looking after hedges, etc. The garden service is going to come in, they're going to buzz through the property, cut the grass, rake up leaves, get it looking sort of clean, almost like a haircut, and then they move on. And so I think it's important for you to get the property to work in a way that is easy for garden services to maintain. Okay, so that kind of covers the idea of lawns. I mentioned the idea of hedges. I think hedges are a great way to get value quickly. And maybe one of the ones that I really enjoy on properties is a bougainvillea. What's nice about it is there's a couple of different colors of flowers on that, and they tend to be very much evergreen as far as the bushes go, so the hedging itself, and they're quite easy to sort of train into a hedge, keep it well trimmed. And one of the other benefits to it is that it's got a bit of a thorn, so they're quite thorny, and that adds a good security element to it. And so I think it's something to really consider. You can always put in some poles, run some hedge training wires between the poles, and get that bougainvillea to be quite a high hedge. And I think that's really a great benefit of using something like bougainvillea. And then there's a lot of other potential hedges that it's very easy. Go down to your local nursery, have a chat to them, say, listen, this is a solution I'm looking at, and put something in place that's going to make a lot of sense. Okay, one of the other main or very important things to look at when it comes to landscaping is trying to stay as indigenous as possible. Now, the biggest reason for that is because any indigenous plants are usually ones that are best as far as the local environment goes, and they're awesome for water usage. You don't want to be in a position where you're now forcing your tenant to spend hundreds of rands every month watering the garden. You want to have in place plants that don't require so much watering. So the indigenous plants are quite good for that. And so I really do suggest chatting to your local nursery. Hey, what indigenous plants are going to require the least amount of water, and and the least amount of maintenance, and look at that. So as opposed to doing lawns and small areas. Look at decorative mulches, look at decorative stones, etc., to put into those spaces and that also sort of protects the soil. It stops it from needing so much water. It retains the moisture in the soil, which reduces your overheads as far as watering goes. And then I really do encourage people to install rainwater catchment systems, even if it's not you living on the property. It's good to sort of give that extra value to your tenants. So put in rainwater tanks and have them set up so as your tenant knows they can use that water to water the gardens, and it's freely available. They can water the garden as much as possible. So you need to put that in place for them to really use it and make sure it's sort of it benefits you as the investor. So I really do encourage that. And then, yeah, I think that really does focus on most of the elements that I really encourage people to put in place as far as the landscaping goes. And you really, I think the key to this is keep it maintenance friendly, reduce the effort for your tenants, and make sure that you look after it. So I do encourage you from a landlord perspective, do your monthly inspections, or should I say your quarterly inspections. Go around to the property, have a look at how the property is being looked after by your tenant. And I think you should bear in mind that in your lease agreement, it is the tenant's responsibility to look after the garden itself. And I think you also review your lease agreements to say, hey, am I happy with the terms that it covers? Yeah. And so as for future tenants, I'm not having to fight with them around the landscaping maintenance. I can sort of point to them and say, listen, you've signed the lease, you've agreed to look after the landscaping. Please, you need to do your part. And you should pull your tenants up on that sort of thing and say, hey, look after the garden. I'm not happy with the way you're looking after the garden. If you don't look after it, I'm going to end up employing someone to look after it, and I'm going to bill you for their time. So you need to put that into their space and make sure they are responsible. So wrapping up, I think it's important from a landscaping perspective. You are responsible. You need to sort of remember that there is value in it. And again, it's that first impression that makes a huge difference. I'm super excited to see any other ideas from all of you in the comments. Please feel free to share your thoughts, share ideas, because it really does help everyone in the community. Thank you very much. We'll see you at the next one.